The blue ribbon was still on the peg. Marcus had left this yard a younger son. He came back a duke, and he came back to ruin Nell Arden. 10 years ago, he had ridden from Larkspur with 2 horses, saddled for a dawn ride, and a bride who never came to it. His father died 2 winters past. His brother followed last spring, a fever, no son behind him. The title found Marcus in a tent in France. When peace came, he sold out and came home. Now he stood in Larkspur Yard, Marcus Ashendale, 7th Duke of Fairholt, with a steward's chalk list in his gloved hand. He cut the ribbon free with his pocket knife, walked to the grey mare chalked first for sale, and knotted it to her head collar. Neat. A tag. South Common closes tomorrow, he said. The Fairholt posting account will not be renewed at Michaelmas. 12 days from now my auctioneer will attend this yard. You may refuse to consign a single horse, but 23 horses cannot eat 40 acres of hill, and I have left you one choice with only one possible answer. The yard stopped. A pitchfork came down slowly against a wall. His aunt, Lady Winifred, sat straight-backed in the Fairholt carriage at the gate with the satisfied stillness of a woman watching a debt collected. Nell Arden came out of the stable dark, with her sleeves rolled and shavings on her boots, reading all of it before he said her name. The agents at the fence, the steward's chalk, the carriage, him. Something in her face priced the whole arrangement to the shilling. "You've brought a great many men, Your Grace," she said, "to say a thing that would have fit in a letter." "South Common is Fairholt pasture despite the old name," he said. "Your father held its grazing on a lease for 3 named lives, and he was the last survivor. The estate's private posting account ran year to year at Michaelmas. Both are mine to end. Nothing here is personal." "No," she said. "Nothing here ever is." Tam Arden had come up behind his sister, a big fair man gone pale around the mouth. "Your Grace, the yard carries 23 horses on that grass. There are 9 households in this lane paid out of those horses. If the common shuts and the posting work goes, the horses starve or sell, and the households—" "Then sell," Marcus said. "You have 12 days and a market. I am told I give better notice than the weather does." He waited, in some closed room of himself, for her to beg. She looked instead at the grey mare wearing her ribbon like a sail lot, and asked nothing at all. "Fenner," she said, to the broad, grey-haired woman in the stable door, "take lot 1 off the sun before she stales in front of the quality." It was then his own horse decided the matter of the morning. Bastion led toward the open, loose box to stand out of the wind, planted at the threshold, went up against the lead, and struck the door with both front feet, a crack like a felled branch. The groom flung sideways into the muck, the black body filling the doorway with noise. Marcus was moving before he thought, voice down in the field register, "Stand." Nell got there without hurrying. She stepped past the wreck of the moment, put her back to the wall, where the horse could see her, and did nothing whatsoever except leave the doorway empty and wait. Bastion came down, stood, blew, walked in on a loose line as if the door had apologized. "Mind your groom's arm," she said to Marcus, going. "And your horse isn't vicious, Your Grace. He's been taught that every doorway closes behind him. He'd rather break the door than learn it again." She was across the yard before he understood that she had told him precisely what she thought of the man who owned the horse, and that she had been kinder about it to the horse. By the second morning, there was a new chain on the South Common gate, and the chain had been bought heavy. A sentence read aloud. Nell stood at the gate and did her arithmetic where nobody could watch. 23 horses, 40 acres of their own, half of it hill, none of it hay by now. 12 days. "We could bid for grass off the neighbours," Tam said beside her. At their price, we'd be selling a horse a month through winter to feed the rest. Or we sell the 2 yearlings now. Hobbsman would take them both this week. Hobbsman will know we're bleeding and price the pair like one. Then he'll price them like one. Tam shut the account book. Nell, I have Mary and Molly. Sam has 5 children, and I owe him his Michaelmas wages. She looked at her brother, 26, steady, and let him be right. Sell the yearlings now. Tell Fairholt's auctioneer I will sign the consignment for the rest, with title ours and every lot withdrawable before the hammer. We hold the mares to sale day. By noon, the first of it came home to roost. Sam, the head groom, gave his notice, gone north to a cousin's coaching yard. Nell paid him his full quarter, though the quarter wasn't done. Mary set the table that evening with one place short, and Molly remarked on it loudly, twice, because she was 2.5, and the world reported all its business through her. It was Fenner, hunting a spare gate key through the oldest tack box, who brought up the past with her hands. A bone whistle, cracked down its length, yellowed like an old tooth. She put it to her mouth before she thought better. 2 notes, the second climbing on the first, sour and carrying, a sound Nell felt in her back teeth. Molly reached for it. Fenner wrapped it in a stocking and pocketed it in one motion, the way you pocket a knife found on a nursery floor. Where did that come from? Nell asked. The bridge, Fenner said, and then, at Nell's look, years back, it'll be nothing. Fenner had never in her life called a thing nothing in that voice. The kitchen filled and warmed regardless, because it was that kind of kitchen. Ruth Finch sat nearest the fire, 14 years old, turned out of March Hall the morning before, with no character and no cause. Nell had met her on the road with her box on her hip, and had simply turned her around by walking beside her. He gave no reason at all, Mary asked, quiet. Sir Dorian doesn't give reasons, Ruth said. He told the housekeeper I was surplus. And he told my father. She looked at her hands. He told my father to mind himself. Now the county has its duke back. Like father was the one who'd done something. Nell kept her eyes on the bread she was cutting. A cold thought cut with her. For 7 years, Dorian had held Abel's place and the Finch cottage over him. For the last 3, since Ruth was old enough for hall service, he had kept the daughter close as well. The day after the Duke came home, the girl was out on the road. That was no economy. That was a message addressed to Abel. The one thing Dorian March had never troubled to plan was where the girl would land. You'll sleep over the tack room, was all she said. You'll earn it. We're short-handed as of this morning. Nell. Tam. Low, at her shoulder. You know what folk will say. Taking in a March Hall servant the same week the Duke's set on ruining us. We can't afford to spite Sir Dorian. Whatever else he is, I'd have hanged at 16 if he hadn't stood for me. I don't forget it. There it was, her brother's understanding of his own life. Wrong way up, and no way to right it that didn't put his neck back inside the question. The girl was on the road, Nell said. Horses and girls on the road, Tam. It's what we do here. He let it go, because kindness was a reason he could believe of her. That evening, bringing the last mares up the lane, they heard it. Far off toward Marchland, a thin 2-note call rising. Nothing answered it but one horse. Celandine, the old chestnut, Dorian's exhibition mare, went from stillness into a stamping half-turn, hard enough to see at a 1/4 mile, wrong in an animal so old and so quiet. Beside Nell, Fenner put her hand over her apron pocket and said nothing at all. The Duke's black gelding had been 3 days at Larkspur. On the 3rd morning, the Duke came to take him in hand. It went as badly as force ever goes. Nell heard it from the feed room. The command voice, the rattle of a lead shank, hooves going up. By the time she reached the loose box, Marcus had the horse cornered, whip in hand, not raised, just carried, as some men carry rank. Bastian stood pressed into the far angle with white showing round his eye, promising the door, the wall, or the man, whichever broke first. "Come out," Nell said. "I have him. You have a horse deciding which of you to go through. Come out." He came out. She swung the door to between man and horse and stood with her hand on it. Inside, within 10 breaths, the striking stopped. There was only the heave of the big body breathing. "He was mishandled before I bought him," Marcus said. "Whoever had him at 3 shut him in the dark to teach him manners. He goes under fire. But doorways, stalls, anything that shuts, he'd sooner kill us both. And you've been teaching him ever since that the dark was right and only the guard has changed." She let that sit exactly as long as it needed. "Give me the whip." He looked at her hand. She saw the memory arrive in his face and be dealt with, filed, denied. She had been 17 that first time, barring him out of the foaling stall with one dirty hand flat on his chest. The mare had come to him when the mare chose. He gave her the whip. "Now knock," she said. "I beg your pardon. On the door, once, then stand off the threshold, there, where he can see all of you, and the open doorway too, and wait. He decides. That's the arrangement. That's the only arrangement there's ever going to be with this horse. Nothing happens to him in a doorway that he didn't choose. He's a cavalry gelding, Miss Arden, not a duchess. Then treat him half as well as one and see what it buys you." Marcus stood a long moment. Then he knocked on his own horse's door, once, like a caller, and stepped back to the place she'd shown him, and waited. They waited a long time. The autumn wet dripped off the gutter. She watched the holding climb his shoulders and set there. The horse's breathing changed first. Then the head came round. Then, in its own hour, the black horse crossed the box and put his nose over the door and stood looking at the man. The man had the sense not to move his hands. "There," she said quietly. "That's the first true thing you've done in this yard." She should not have said it in that voice. She knew it even as she heard herself, the plain warm one, long retired. He heard it too, and decided, with some effort, to be a duke about it. "My aunt," he said, formal again, gloved again, "has ruled that Larkspur's remaining stock will be shown at the autumn horse show at the riding house, 2 days after my sale. Sir Dorian has entered his chestnut mare. The county will attend to watch this yard stripped. Then the county will see well-schooled horses," Nell said, "sold by a fool." The word landed. He took it without blinking. That was new. "Until the exhibition, then," he said, and it turned into something that was almost, catastrophically, a question. "You'll school him?" "Both of us, until then." She looked at him standing where she'd put him, off the threshold, empty-handed, asking. It was going to cost her something that he was learning to ask now, one ruin too late. "On one condition," she said. "No horse in this yard is ever punished for your impatience. Not once. The day you break that, you take your gelding and your ribbons, and you go." "Agreed," said the Duke of Fairholt, too quickly for a man who had come to ruin her. Bastian, above the door, sighed like a bellows, and lipped at his master's collar. The Duke stood very still and let him. The schooling ring at Larkspur was 40 feet of raked sand. Marcus stood in the middle of it, feeling more exposed than he had ever felt in Spain. "The glove," Nell said. "The glove is not the difficulty. The glove is the whole difficulty. He was beaten by leather and buckles, your grace. To this horse, a gloved hand has become another piece of harness with a man behind it." She stood at Bastian's shoulder, the lead slack in her fingers. He'll take a bare hand or none. The cold was the excuse his body offered for the reluctance. It was a lie. He had not given his bare hand to anything living in longer than he could comfortably count. He pulled the right glove off, finger by finger. The air bit his knuckles like water. Where? Low. Under his nose, not at it. Let him do the last part. And then she did the thing that undid the morning. She took his wrist, without ceremony, the way she'd take a rein, and guided his open hand down beneath the great black head, and left it there, and stepped away. Her fingers had been on his skin for perhaps 3 seconds. Farm work rough, colder than his. 13 summers ago, in another stable, she had taken his wrist exactly so, and put his hand beneath a day-old foal's muzzle, and he had thought, at 19, this is the whole of what I want. This hand, this yard, nothing since had cooled it by a single degree. Bastian's nostril came down. The breath went over his bare fingers, warm, and stopped, and came again, testing. Then the horse took one step, his own step, unasked, the near foreleg reaching, the dark weight choosing to arrive, and set his muzzle in the Duke's open palm. Marcus did not move. He heard Nell let out the breath she'd have denied holding. 4 years, he said. He has never... Don't talk over him. So he stood in the cold and was chosen by his own horse, and something he had kept short-reined since a chapel bell finished ringing at his back went loose by one hole. He let it. It was a far-off call that ended it. 2 notes, thin with distance, off marchland. The first note flat, the second climbing a third above it, an ugly interval. Bastian merely flicked an ear, but away across the boundary hedge, in the march's near paddock where Abel Finch was lunging the old chestnut mare before the exhibition, Celandine went off like a sprung trap. Up, both forelegs boxing the air, then a wrenching quarter turn on the hocks, precise as drill, and back to grazing as though a switch had been thrown twice. The lead was out of Nell's hand. She had crossed to the rail without knowing it. She was watching the old mare with her face gone still. Not puzzlement. Recognition without an address, the look of a woman hearing a voice she knows through a wall. At the March paddock rail, small with distance, Sir Dorian March sat his hack beside his groom, his voice carried as a magistrate's is trained to. An old circus trick of her youth, Finch. I've told you, no whistling round that mare. She was ruined for it years ago. See, she settles before the county comes. It was the one vanity the county knew its magistrate by. No story could run wrong in his hearing. He would put a date right at a funeral. An old trick. A 17-year-old mare. Drill sharp on a cue that her owner both forbade and could name at a quarter mile. Marcus looked at Nell looking at the mare, and made his choice with a discipline he was prouder of than any charge he'd ridden. He asked her nothing. He filed the interval, the precision, the magistrate's careful boredom, and turned back to his horse. He knew one thing now. It went down hard and stayed down. She was afraid of something that had a sound. March owned the sound. The Fairholt posting gelding came in lame on the 5th morning, a big honest bay with a bowed tendon. Nell gave him the last dry recovery stall, the one held for the best of the sale mares. That's Fairholt's horse, Fenner said. Let Fairholt stable his own cripples. The Duke came down for Bastian's session and got this instead. His own cropped gelding installed like a bishop in the best room of the yard he was breaking up. He said nothing while she wrapped the leg. Ride out with me, he said at last. Not the ring, out. Where? Nowhere. That's rather the substance of the invitation. She should have said no. The man asking was the reason there was a sale in 8 days at all. But she was 30 years old and done lying to herself in this one respect. She wanted the ride. They went up the orchard lane with the last apples rotting sweet in the grass. She set the pace, and he kept to it, which, for the first mile she assumed was strategy. It wasn't. She tested it, slowed for no reason, at a good galloping stretch, turned down the bad, boggy headland any sane rider argues about. He rode a length behind her the whole way, exactly where a second rider ought to be. Somewhere abroad, the boy who had always ridden half a length in front had learned to follow a line. The old rhythm was still there, the thing she had not thought to brace for. At every gate one of them had it open before the other asked. When the rain came through on a slant, they turned their collars up in the same second. Both laughed. His laugh came out rusty, 2 sizes too small for his chest, a thing found at the back of a drawer. He heard it himself, and looked so plainly ambushed that she laughed again, at him. For a quarter mile they were neither of them anybody's ruin. On the high meadow they let the horses blow. Below, you could see the chain glinting on the south common gate if you knew where to look. She watched him find it. It was necessary, he said. The rust was gone. The ducal voice was back. Don't. She said it without heat. You'll not sit on my hill and call that chain necessary. Call it what you like in your own house. On this ground, it's a chain you bought for a woman, and we both know her name. The muscle in his jaw stood out. And what am I permitted to be, on this ground, besides a title with a grudge? I don't know yet, she said honestly. That's the first thing about you I haven't known since you left, and I'll thank you not to rush me. Away across the valley, March Hall stood pale among its trees. A closed carriage waited at the foot of the steps. Beneath the portico, Lady Beatrice, an earl's daughter married into that house 2 winters after Marcus sailed, made as if to come down to it. Dorian, mounted below, lifted one gloved finger back toward the door. His wife turned and went in. People called it a rescue, Nell said, watching the door take her. I think he mistakes dependence for devotion. Something crossed his face that was gone before she could read it. He gathered his reins. Below them Larkspur came into view, small and whole, 9 chimneys smoking. She saw him take it in, the thing his signature was unmaking. We should go down, Nell, he said. Your yard will be wanting. He stopped. The name had sat unused since the wedding eve. It had come out of him at a walk, on loose ground, entirely without orders. Miss Arden, he corrected, to the space between Bastion's ears, and rode down the hill in front of her, shoulders squared. Nell came down after him in her own time, letting the distance say that she had heard it, and that she was not ready to say what it had cost her to hear. The Fairholt stables ran to 60 stalls of oiled oak and brass. Marcus walked their length at first light, finding fault with nothing, and peace with less. He stopped at the end box, where they'd stabled Bastion the first week. The kick marks were still in the lower panel. A chain still hung over the top bar. He had signed off on that chain and called it management. Nell Arden had found the first loose thread in 4 years of it in one wet morning by giving the animal the one thing he had never put on the requisition, a choice. Take the chain off, he told the stable boy, who fled to do it. His aunt found him there, still in his riding coat. Lady Winifred did not ride out at dawn, therefore the county had already reported to her. You were seen, she said, laughing on the high meadow with the Arden woman. Laughing, Marcus. I'll confine myself to weeping in future. Do not be clever with me. I nursed your mother. I watched that woman jilt you with the wedding meats ordered. She sold you at 20 for certainty, her own word, and you proposed to hand her the laugh twice. She drew an envelope from her muff. The Agricultural Society dines Thursday. The miller's wife had a mind to send the Arden woman a card this year. I stopped it, as I have stopped every card these 10 years. Miss Arden's price, Marcus. My phrase. I coined it in my own drawing room the week you sailed, and the county has been spending it ever since. I do not intend to see it devalued now. Once, that speech would have found nothing in him to argue with. It was his own speech. He had built a very good duke out of it. The trouble with it, he had discovered on a hillside on Tuesday, was one plank he had never once put his weight on. He had assumed the jilting had cost her nothing. "Aunt," he said, "in 10 years, did you ever once watch her spend a shilling of March's money on herself? A gown, a horse, a season in town? Name me one." Silence, in which something that was not quite doubt, but was doubt's advance rider, crossed his aunt's face, and was repelled at the border. "Hope is unbecoming in a man your age," she said at last, cold. "You had cause, and you have the means, and the county expects the sale. See it through, or be laughed at twice, and I shall not attend the second performance." He walked to Larkspur because Bastian was there, and because his day had begun organizing itself, without leave, around the hour when Nell Arden looked up and found him at the rail. He knew the name of the condition. It frightened him more than the ruin agenda ever had. Hatred he could execute. Hope had him back at the chapel wall counting bell strokes. At the yard gate he stopped, bent, and took off his spurs. Everything in that yard worked on consent. He was done arriving anywhere with steel on his heels. His steward caught him at the gate at dusk. "Your Grace, the catalogue. It goes to the printer at midnight, Thursday. That was the schedule you set. After that, the printed list cannot be altered. The owners may still withdraw before the hammer, and you may cancel your auctioneer. But every buyer in 3 counties will read the fixed catalogue as a distress sale. 1 line from you holds the press. Do we hold, or do we let it run?" The old speech still had one hand on him, the county watching, the laugh, the boot. "Let it run," Marcus said. "The sale keeps its day." He heard the small sound behind him too late. Nell stood at the tack-room corner with the evening feeds, close enough to have heard exactly 1 sentence of his entire day, that one, and she turned and went in without a word. The door she closed behind her made hardly any sound at all, somehow worse than the horse's way. The rain came in off the hills at evening stables like a decision. It caught them at the end of Bastian's session with the yard already running and the light going fast. "Leave him," Nell said, over the drum of it. "He's dry, he's fed, and you'll drown between here and the gate. There's a lull in most storms if you've the patience to owe it." So the Duke of Fairholt stood in her west stable doorway, waiting on the weather like any drover, his collar dark with wet. The 2 of them were alone with the rain on the slates and 20 horses pulling hay in the dark behind them, and there was nowhere to be and nothing, for once, to be done. Fenner came through with a lantern, took one comprehensive look at the arrangement, said, "Mind the latch, it sticks," to nobody in particular, and left, remembering everything. Nell knew this doorway. That was the difficulty with the lull. The latch was cold under her palm in the old way. The rain ticked on the slate in the old way. The last time all of that had been true, at once she had been 20. He had kissed her, once, before the county and the bell and the whole grey weight of the years after. He was watching the rain. He said, without turning, "Do you remember this door?" Remembering was never the difficulty, Your Grace. That turned him. The lantern light took him at an angle. He looked at her mouth, and then, with a discipline she could watch working, at her eyes. He took 1 step. The space of the doorway went small and warm and old as the latch. Nell. Quietly. No correction this time. The name stood in the doorway with them, like a third person. "I find I am—" He stopped, and made himself set it down bare, with none of the armor left on it. "I find I am not here for the horse." Her hand knew the latch. Her body was 20, and had learned this door by heart, and saw no reason at all to consult her. It would be easy as falling is easy. You only stop holding. Over his shoulder, in the sale barn, the lantern caught a row of small pale tags, one on every headstall down the line, his auction laid out neat as graves. "No," she said. He went still. Then he stepped back. Credit where it was owed. He stepped back at the word, all the way to the far jamb, and put his hands behind him like a man taking his own parole. "Not because of the bell," she said. Her voice stayed level. She was rather proud of it. "And not because I don't. You can have that much for your ledger. Not because I don't. But your ribbons are on my horses, Marcus. Every animal in that barn is wearing your intention. If I kiss you under those, I'm a woman buying mercy with the only coin left in the house, and you'd wake in a month and wonder, some bad night, if that was what it was. And so would I. I've been 10 years the woman who sold you. I won't be the woman who bought you back." The rain filled the doorway a while. "You could simply hate me," he said. "It was simpler when you did." "I never managed it," Nell said. "I tried. It wouldn't hold." She crossed the yard, through the wet, to the sale barn, feeling him watch her from the doorway. She went down the line to the grey mare, Lot 1, and untied the faded blue ribbon from the head collar. The old dye had gone to the colour of wood smoke, cheap dye, and a girl's whole heart. She put it in her pocket. She did not give it back to him. "That one's mine," was all she said, coming back past him into the lantern light. "The mare you can sell, the morning you can't have." The lull opened. The rain stepped down to a drizzle. He went out into it without another word, and was a shape, and then nothing, on the Fairholt road. What happened at the other end of that road she had much later, from his own steward. It was Thursday. At midnight, the pages would go to the printer's boy, and the advertised lots would be fixed on paper. The Ardens could still withdraw before the hammer. Marcus could cancel his auctioneer. But every buyer would wake knowing the sale was real, and price the yard's desperation accordingly. One sentence in his own hand would hold the press. He had written home through the rain, meaning to write it. Hold the catalogue. 3 words. The Duke of Fairholt sat down at his desk, wet through, without taking off his coat, and drew a sheet to him, and took up the pen, and did not write. The rain she had refused him in ticked on the glass. The clock walked to midnight, 1 stroke at a time, and he sat with the pen full and the page empty, and let every stroke fall. He had stood in an open door, 1 breath too long, and had felt what it might cost him to keep standing there. Pride handed him the oldest sentence in his arsenal. Let it run. The cruelty was already his, so was the unwritten reprieve. At midnight, he had chosen both. That is how most of the harm in the world gets done, not by orders given, but by sentences left unwritten, and the clock forgives none of it. At the 12th stroke, the boy carried the pages away to a press already set, and the sale was publicly certain. The printed catalogue reached Larkspur with the morning bread. Marcus was in the yard to see it arrive. A printed catalogue is a distress flag. Hobbs' man had been waiting for it. With the sale publicly certain, no seller could afford to wait. By 9 o'clock, Tam Arden stood in the lane, taking a broken price for both yearlings. The young horses went off the property nose to tail behind a dealer's hack. Tam watched them all the way down the lane with the particular stillness of a man selling his next 3 years. By 10, The Trussock's cart was loaded. Second family gone. The wife had kin near a manufactory town. The husband shook Tam's hand and could not look at Nell. Their girl sat on the tailboard holding a hen. You cannot summon a family home again, Marcus thought. You can reopen a common. You cannot relight a kitchen someone else is cooking in by Martinmas. Things a signature does that a signature cannot undo. Things an unwritten sentence does, which are the same things, and cheaper. And by 11, he had seen Nell come out of the house with the breeding reserve, 10 careful years of put-by money, carried like a coffin, and count wages into the hands of the grooms who remained. She had not spoken to him. Your Grace, at the gate, once, level as a toll. The name Nell had gone back into its drawer, and he had let the shutting stand, and knowing it unlocked nothing. It was Ruth who broke the morning open. Fenner, hunting through her apron for a gate key, set the small stocking-wrapped weight on the mounting block for half a breath. The girl went white to the lips. "Where did you get that?" Fenner's hand covered it. "Why?" "That sound." Ruth's voice had dropped to nearly nothing. Her eyes went to the March Road first, before the words came. Marcus marked it, fear that checks the road before it speaks. "You blew it. Days ago. I was sick before I knew why. It's the sound my father hears in his sleep. My whole life he'd come up shouting, and my mother, when she was living, would say to him, 'You made no horse dance, Abel Finch. You made no horse dance.' Over and over, like a prayer, till he'd stop. And once, I was little, Sir Dorian came to our cottage door at night, and I heard him tell father through the wall, very kind, the kindest voice, 'Mind you never make a horse dance again, Finch. Men hang for less.'" The yard had gone quiet around the girl. Marcus stood very still, assembling it, and it was into that silence that Sir Dorian March rode, unhurried, hat lifted, come to confirm the exhibition entries. The wrapped thing was back in Fenner's apron before his horse's second stride. Ruth was gone into the tack room like smoke up a flue. Fair halt. Dorian's bow from the saddle was flawless. Such patience, and then such administration, the common, the contract, the catalogue, and the lady counting out her savings in her own yard. It appears she taught you something after all. Everything has its price, and she of all women knows the rate. The sentence was built to cut both of them with one edge. Marcus watched it land on Nell, watched her take it standing, the way she took weather. His own anger had changed sides so completely that his first, animal thought was of the horsewhip on the tack-room wall. That was precisely the thought the man had come to farm. "Miss Arden," Marcus said quietly, "the yearlings, the wages. Name the sum, and it's restored by dusk. That much at least is arithmetic. So was the harm, Your Grace." She looked at him fully for the first time that day. He would have preferred the whip. "You can't buy back the same coin you spent. It comes back changed. Keep your purse. I keep my accounts in a harness room, and they balance." Dorian gathered his reins to go, and delivered his last line from the saddle, cheerfully, in her hearing. "If you want the truth of your broken wedding, Fairholt, you're asking the wrong questions of the wrong Arden. Ask the brother what I once kept him from hanging for. Then ask yourself what a sister might pay, or say, to keep a family's neck out of my court." Nell was in the harness room when the two of them arrived within a minute of each other. Marcus first, still carrying Dorian's sentence like a live coal in a glove, and then Dorian himself, filling her doorway with his hat in his hand. "Come," he said, to offer his poor services, as the only person present with nothing to hide. "Get out of my doorway," Nell said. "You may stand in the room or in the yard. You don't stand in my door." He took the room. He told the story she had kept in its box for 10 years, and he told it almost straight, which was the vilest part of his art. Every fact true, and every joint between them false. A decade ago, the night before a certain wedding, my brother Cedric died at Coldwater Bridge. At the coroner's inquest, my groom swore that young Tam Arden, 16 and 3 days off a public threat against Cedric after Cedric thrashed a stable boy, had lain in wait and deliberately sounded the mare up on the stone. Yet at my urging, the jury returned misadventure, and the boy walked home to his sister. The sworn evidence remained in the county papers, and his sister, the pause was a craftsman's, reconsidered her engagements. You were there for the rest, Fairholt. You bought her, Marcus said, down in the field register, with her brother's neck. I extended a courtesy, and the lady expressed a preference. Dorian's eyes came to Nell, a man who had stood guard on his own lie so long he had promoted it to property. Well, Miss Arden, will you put the noose back on the table, with my head groom's sworn word against a story you cannot prove? Do think before you answer. Tam has a wife now, a daughter. You've said your piece, Nell said. The yard, Sir Dorian. He bowed over his hat and went. Then the harness room was very quiet. She did it plainly, tiredly, in her work apron, with no speech at all. It was no accident, she said. I can't prove that, and I won't tell you tonight how I know, because the knowing isn't mine to spend. It has a man's daughter attached to it. He came to me before Cedric was cold. He had an information drawn up. I saw it, Marcus, the boy's name spelled out fair, and a witness ready to swear Tam had lain in wait after threatening Cedric and deliberately driven the mare up on the bridge. And he named his price with his hat in his hand. The wedding called off, and the words said so that you would carry them. He wrote the sentence himself. He made me say it twice through, till I had it right. Her voice went thin. She let it. I will not trade the rest of my life for a younger son's promise. Sir Dorian has put the Arden house right, and I prefer certainty. Marcus stood absolutely still. You said it to my face, in the yard, in the rain. He was in his carriage at the lane's end, watching me say it. That was in the price too. The question came out of him with the leather still on it. Must every cruelty become evidence of how well you loved me? No. Good, because it does not. He let it stand. And understand what he bought, Marcus, because it was never me. Married to you, I was a duchess, all of us out past his fences for good. Jilted, we stayed small, a grateful boy who owed him his neck, a yard that could be squeezed in any bad winter. A woman alone with a secret he held the other end of. He didn't need me to marry him. He needed me unable to leave, and there is a kind of man to whom that is the better bargain. She watched the years refile themselves in him, and what came up first wasn't relief. He looked at her the way a man looks at a field where his dead are, and underneath it, arriving last and hitting hardest. You decided, he said slowly, that I couldn't be told. Not that night. Not by letter, from anywhere on earth in all those years. You took my measure, and I came up short. Say it. It was so, Nell said, steady. You were 22, and you loved me, and you'd have gone straight at him with the truth held out like a lance, and he'd have had you in a cell or a grave, and Tam hanged in the mess of it. I priced you cheap to keep you alive, Marcus. I've had every night since to study whether I'd do it again. And? I'd save Tam again. Every time. You may hate that clean. It doesn't alter. She made herself hold his eyes. But I have watched what came back off that ship. The gloves, the doors. And I know now what I told myself was costless wasn't. I spent you, and I called it sparing you, and I never once wrote the debt down. That's my accounting. It's late, and it's the whole of it. He swore against Tam once, and he'll swear again, Nell said. Nothing reaches Dorian that doesn't go through Abel Finch, and Abel Finch has a daughter, and until this week the daughter slept under Dorian's roof. Now she sleeps under mine. There is beginning, barely, to be a move on that board that doesn't kill somebody I feed. And if you go at him tonight with your title and your temper, you close it. Marcus looked down at his hands, gloved. A long way off she heard the chapel clock. She knew by his face he was hearing a different bell. The morning after, he said, not looking up. I had the horses saddled at 5, both of them. I stood at the chapel wall like a fool until the bell had done. I have hated you in 11 languages, Eleanor Arden. I was fluent. He drew a breath that moved his shoulders. What do you want me to do? Nothing, she said. Tonight, nothing. That's the asking, Marcus. That's the whole trick of the open hand. The hardest thing I will ever ask of you is nothing. He stood a moment longer. Then he took off one glove, folded it into his pocket, held the door open, and waited for her to pass first, at her own pace, and said, at her shoulder, so quietly it hardly bent the air, "Then I'll learn nothing. But learn me this trade fast, Nell. I was 10 years bad at hating you, and I can already feel how bad I'm going to be at this." She took him to the bridge the next morning, because he had asked to see it, hat in hand like a tenant, and because, she said, if he was going to carry the story he might as well carry it the size it actually was. Coldwater Bridge was a low-humped span of grey stone where the lane crossed the beck. The ground made the argument for her inside a minute. The meadow ran soft and wide to the south. A horseman spilled there would roll in October grass and get up swearing. The bridge was the one hard place in half a mile, a low parapet and a drop to the stones under it. He was never meant to die. Nell stood at the parapet with her hood back, wet gathering in her hair. That's the part I believe to my boots. The plan wanted the meadow, a reconciliation ride. Cedric and Tam, shake hands, boys, together. Dorian arranged it and chose the ground. The mare was to go up in the meadow, pitch Cedric into the grass, and the county was to be told the Arden boy had played a coward's trick on a better man's horse. A disgraced family, a postponed wedding, and March, magnificent, stepping in to save us from the ruin he'd built. But Cedric was Cedric. A mile out he got bored and called the change himself, race you by the bridge lane. Last one shoes the mare. And Dorian was posted where he could watch and be seen to be elsewhere. And he watched his brother turn onto the stone, and he gave the signal anyway. How do you know that? His voice came out low. Abel told me 3 years ago, when Dorian took Ruth into hall service at 11 and named the price of her bread. Before that, Dorian held Abel's place and cottage. After that, he held the child herself. Abel told me the signal, the hedge, and the raised hand, but he would not swear while she slept under March's roof. He put both hands on the parapet and let the last of it assemble. "And I believe you," he said. It came out with no drum roll at all. "You should hear the shape of what you're believing," she said. "No paper, no witness who dares. Only a jilt telling you a story in the rain that acquits her family and hangs her neighbor. It isn't a story you can believe, Marcus. Not on evidence." "No," he agreed, "on the woman." He took his hands off the stone and faced her, and gave his account plainly, as she'd given hers in the harness room. "I came home to ruin you on evidence. Years of it, sworn to me by my own ears. I was wrong on my own ears. So the ears resign. What's left is this. I have watched you 8 days with everything you love under my knife, and you have not once lied to me. You've refused me answers to my face, which is the opposite of lying. You gave your last dry stall to my lame horse. You took in the daughter of the man whose silence keeps yours dangerous, and asked her nothing. I believe you the way I believe ground I've walked. Belief you can have this morning, free, before proof, because after a lifetime of arriving late, Nell, I am damned if I'll be late to this as well. Something that had been standing guard in her face since the wedding eve got relieved of its post. Relief. That was the name of what went through her. Relief with 10 years' rust on it. It nearly buckled her knees. There's a cruelty in you doing that here, she said, unsteady for the first time. On this bridge, where believing me was cheapest once, and nobody bought. I had the words, he said. That was the devil of it, half across France. You'd said them looking at my chin, not my eyes. You who'd stared down my father at 17 over a foaling stool. I had every piece of it, Nell, and I chose the reading that let me leave angry instead of the one that would have made me stay and dig. Anger travels lighter. That's my accounting. You priced me cheap to save my life. I priced you false to save my pride. So we were both wrong about who was expendable, she said at last, dry as fenna, and it startled a short, real laugh out of him. Here, on this stone, which was perhaps the only way either of them could have borne the place. I won't go at March, he said, when they had turned back toward the horses. No challenge, no bought witness, no leaning on the bench. You set the pace. I keep to it. But hear my one condition. When the day comes that it can be spoken, I am there. Not as Fairholt, as the man it was done to. There were 2 of us robbed at that bridge, Nell. When you take it back, I ride behind you. Behind me, she said, tasting the arrangement for traps and finding none. Then there's a thing you should know first. The next truth isn't yours. It's Tam's, and he's owed it, before any move gets made, and he may hate me at the end of the telling. That happens tomorrow. Alone. Alone, Marcus said, and gave it up without gloves in his voice. I'll be outside. Not in the room. Whenever it's done, I'll be in the yard. He was better than his word, and the better arrived by noon. A paper in the Duke's own hand, carried by a dripping Fairholt groom. Nell read it twice before she trusted it. No horse was to leave the county on any Fairholt account, and no lot would move before the sale day, whatever the catalogue said. Feed and wages for every household in the lane were to be carried on the Fairholt books until a public settlement, asked or unasked, and the South Common Gate stood open from that afternoon, provisionally, pending the same settlement. The chain was off by evening. The mares walked through ahead of any paper. She folded the order into the account book. Fenner, who missed nothing, said nothing. Between the 2 of them, that was a whole conversation. She told Tam in the kitchen, with Mary beside him and Molly asleep upstairs, and Fenner standing guard at the door. It took less time than the years had promised. The fall, the cue, the information drawn fair with his name in it, the price, the sentence rehearsed twice through in the rain, told in the time it takes to clean a bridle. Tam sat with his hands flat on the table while his life was taken apart and reassembled. What he said first, when he could say anything, was, "The tack room. Tam, the tack room at March Hall, the week before your wedding. I'd gone up about the bay pony, and I heard him through the wall, saying a thing over, the same words, twice, 3 times, like a man conning a part. I will not trade the rest of my life for a younger son's promise. I thought," his voice went. He steadied it. "Nell, all these years I thought I'd overheard him practicing some cruelty of his own that never came off. It was your voice he was writing. I heard your jilting rehearsed, and I ate his mercy every day since. I named him in my prayers, Nell, beside Father. You were 16, Mary said quietly. You were meant to mistake it. It was built to be mistaken. And you? Tam looked at his sister. Here it came, the thing Nell had spent years flinching from. What stood up in him first, white and shaking, was rage with no place to be put down. You sat at that table, this table, Christmases, christenings, you stood godmother to my Molly with this in your mouth, and you never— He stopped. He was weeping. It seemed to be news to him. You bought me a wife and a daughter, and every day I've had— No, don't touch me just now, Nell, I beg you. I have to be angry a minute or I'll be nothing at all. So she sat still, 3 feet from her brother, and let him be angry, because he was owed it. It was Mary, in the end, who moved, who reached across and took Tam's fist and opened it finger by finger and said, Now ask her the question, love. Not the 10 years question, tonight's. Tam wiped his face with his sleeve. 1 pass, done. What does he need? March. To stay safe, what does he need from me? Silence, Nell said. Same coin as ever. He needs the Ardens quiet and grateful, and the county certain, and everything as it was. Then he can't have it. It came out flat and immediate, a man stating the water level. Molly will not grow up in a county where that man decides what happened. If there's a way to say it where it counts, I say it. The tack room, the rehearsal, all of it. My own name in the noose beside it, if that's the freight. You've stood between me and the drop since I was 16 now. Stand aside now. It's my turn to be worth something. It isn't stand aside, Nell said. It's stand with. There's a difference, and the difference is the whole plan, and it isn't ready by 2 witnesses yet. Through the window, in the yard, a shape moved against the tack-room lantern. The Duke of Fairholt, walking the cobbles in the cold, exactly where he'd said he would be. He had come at dusk. He had not knocked. He's been out there the whole time, Mary asked, following her look. He asked to be. Nell got up and opened the kitchen door. Marcus turned under the lantern and made no move toward the warm doorway. He waited, in the cold, at the threshold of Bastion's arrangement. Everything visible, nothing advancing. She found the sight of it more unmanning than any speech. Tam's decided, she said. Come in. He should tell you himself. Crossing the step, level with her, his hand came up. 10 years of muscle memory rose in it, the palm that used to come to her cheek, sure of its welcome. She only looked at it. He caught the gesture mid-air and unbuilt it, turned the palm over, slow, and left it open between them, asking. She put her hand on his sleeve, not his hand, his sleeve, walnut skin, 3 breaths' worth, which was what she had to spend, and no shilling further, and took it back. That's more than I've had in years, he said low. It wasn't a complaint. He was learning the currency. It's more than I've spent in years, she said. Don't bank it yet. Behind them, Ruth came down the stairs 2 at a time with her shawl wrong and her face urgent. Her father had got word to her through the carter's boy. Abel Finch wanted to see the man, not the Duke. He'd said it twice. Not the Duke, the man. It had to be before the exhibition. Sir Dorian could not know. The posting shed stood empty on the road between the 2 estates. Abel Finch was there before them, in the dark corner farthest from the door, a big man made small by long, careful carrying. Ruth stood by her father. Nell kept to the wall, and in the doorway, unannounced, stood Lady Beatrice March in a plain travelling cloak. It was Ruth who had got word to her, through the same carter's boy, because a girl who has swept a house's floors knows which of its doors the mistress can still open unwatched. At the sight of her, Abel went rigid until she said, "I am not here for my husband, Finch. I am here because I have stopped being here for my husband. Go on with it." "Your Grace." Abel's voice was rust and gravel. "Sir Dorian had me train the mare. 2 winters' work off where nobody walks. A rising 2-note. He didn't sound it, the refusal living in his face. And she goes up and comes round hard. Pretty as drill. For a prank, he told me, and I was 24 and stupid, and his. And the morning of it he put me under the thorn hedge by the bridge lane and said, these words, I've kept them 10 years, they don't wear out. At my raised hand 2 notes, make her dance. The shed was very quiet. Mr. Cedric turned onto the bridge. I saw the stone under him. I looked to the master, and the hand was up. And I blew. And afterward, Marcus said level. Afterward he stood over me while I shook, and told me what I was. A murderer, he said, unless he chose otherwise. He'd swear I did it off my own spite, or he'd lay a fresh information that the Arden boy had lain in wait and shouted the mare up on the stone, and I'd swear it with him. And that was the mercy on offer, hang alone or lie in company. I lied in company. 10 years. He kept my place and cottage over me first, and called that mercy. 3 years ago he took Ruth into the hall and called it kindness where folk could hear, and called it what it was where only I could. And the day the new Duke came home, he turned her out on the road, no cause given. It was never about the girl. It was a letter, and I was the man it was posted to. Mind the length of your rope, Finch. The one thing he never reckoned was where she'd land. He looked at Nell then, one look, and down. And this fortnight past, he's had me out at dusk, sounding the old notes off the far fields, to see was the trick dead in the mare before the county came close to her. 10 years of quiet, and she answers still. You'll have heard it carrying. That was me. So now you know your wedding, your grace. What'll you give me to say it where it counts? The shed waited. Nothing, Marcus said. Abel blinked. You heard me, Finch, so I'll say it plainly. I will not pay you a shilling for testimony. Bought words are Dorian's trade. When they ask what Fairholt gave you, the truth has to be able to answer nothing, or it's no truth at all. He checked the old advance in himself, and gave the rest bareheaded. Here is what exists whether you speak or not. Ruth has a place, wages, and a roof, for as long as she wants one. Miss Arden did that before I ever knew your name, and it doesn't sit in my gift to take back. And if you speak, I can promise exactly one thing, and it isn't safety. You'll face whatever the law makes of you, as a man with the Duke of Fairholt standing at your shoulder, not over you. I can't keep you from the bench, and I won't lie to you about that. You've had enough of men lying to you. Then what in God's name, Abel said hoarsely, is in it for me? The end of the carrying, Marcus said. I'm told it's considerable. The silence went long. It was Ruth who ended it. Ruth, who crossed the dirty floor and stood in front of her father, 14 years old, and said, Da, I'm safe. I've been safe since Friday. Not safe like he kept me, safe like the horses are, where nobody's watching to see, do I earn it? You always said you couldn't afford the truth while our roof was his and I ate his bread. The roof is safe now, and I don't eat his bread. So those are your last reasons, Dar. I've come to take them away. And that, not the Duke's speech, was the blow that landed. Nell saw the man come apart at it, quietly, along 10-year-old seams, and put himself back together around a different center. At the exhibition, Abel said finally, to the floor, and then made himself say it to their faces. Not before. Words first from the boy, and then let the mare answer, before the county, before the bench. And when she's answered, I'll come down and swear to the rest with my own neck in it. Nobody believes the groom first. The groom's the man who lies for masters. Let them hear the mare, and then hear me. The mare can't be bought, and after her maybe, no more can I. There is one more thing in the room, Lady Beatrice said from the door, in the voice of a woman spending the only coin she'd been left. My husband will bring the mare himself. He believes she proves the old story, the Arden boy and the vicious animal. He is not afraid of the mare. He is proud of her. That is the door standing open, and none of you had to force it. She gathered her cloak. You have wondered all these years what he wanted of you, Miss Arden. I have had 8 years behind his locked doors to study it. He did not need you to marry him. He needed you unable to leave his orbit. My husband has never forgiven a useful person for becoming free. Riding back, the lights of Larkspur small and ahead, Nell said to the man beside her, You didn't buy him. I watched you not buy him. It would have been faster. It would have been mine, Marcus said. The whole of it, forever, my witness, my verdict, my mercy. March's Road, 1 county over. I've had things belong to me all my life. I'm trying to learn what stands on its own. The horse, the man, you most of all. And he reined the sentence itself, mid-stride, and finished it open-handed. You most of all. I want never to own. Tomorrow I start proving that in public. The auction morning came up in rain. The county came anyway, because ruin is better theatre than weather. They packed the Larkspur yard under oilcloth and umbrellas. Buyers from 3 counties, Hobbs' man in the front rank, Lady Winifred Dry under the carriage canopy, Sir Dorian March mounted where the light was best. The horses stood down the line in their sail halters, tagged lot by lot, manes dark with wet. The auctioneer had got as far as Lot 1, a grey mare, 6 years old, quiet in all, when Marcus walked into the middle of his own sale and said, Stop. The word came out in the register that had once turned a column on a road in Spain. It turned the yard as cleanly. There will be no sale today. He stood bareheaded in the rain, gloves left at Fairholt on purpose, and his bare hands felt every degree of the cold. A man should feel a thing this size. Not today, not on any day, and before this county invents its own reasons, it will have mine. He could see Nell at the rail, stone still, Fenner's hand gripped in hers. He did not look at her again. This had to be paid to the room. Everything done to this yard this fortnight was done by me, on purpose, and it was not estate discipline. I closed a common 80 acres wide, to starve 23 horses I had no quarrel with. I tore up a posting contract 3 generations old. I let the catalogue go to press, when one line of my own hand would have held it, and yearlings went at a broken price because of it. I called it management. I did it because 10 years ago I was jilted in this county, and I came home rich enough to make a woman regret it. That's the whole of the policy, sirs. You've been attending a jealous man's arithmetic, dressed as land agency. Somebody laughed, one bark, and strangled it. Lady Winifred had gone the colour of the sky. So, the sale is cancelled. The lots are struck. My auctioneer is paid his full commission to go home. South Common stands open since Thursday, and today the opening goes into writing. The lease renews on the old terms, a 3-life lease, renewable. The posting contract is reinstated with arrears. The 2 yearlings are bought back at Hobbs' demanded figure and returned to Larkspur at my cost. Miss Arden's breeding reserve is restored in full. To all 9 households, resident or gone, every lost wage and reasonable removal cost will be paid by Fairholt before quarter day. He turned then, deliberately, to face the line of horses in their halters, and drew his knife, and went down the line in the rain, cutting every sail tag off with his own cold hands, one by one, the county watching a duke do groom's work. The small, pale tags went into the mud where they belonged. Restitution, he said, coming back to the middle, is not absolution, and I want that entered in the county's ledger as carefully as the rest. Sam and the Trussocks are gone north and cannot be summoned home. Money restores neither a post surrendered under pressure nor a kitchen emptied. Replacing Miss Arden's reserve cannot erase that she had to break it. I can pay what a wrong costs. I cannot make it not have happened. And then, with Dorian March sitting his horse in neighbourly sorrow, Marcus said the rest. One more entry closes the book. I came home believing a story about a woman, that she weighed love against certainty, and sold. I now believe that story is false, root, branch, and telling. I have evidence concerning Coldwater Bridge, but it belongs first to the witnesses who will lay it before the county on their own terms. Therefore I name nobody this morning. He let his eyes pass across Dorian's without stopping, at parade speed. The day after tomorrow, at the riding house, this county will be assembled for the autumn horse show. Attend. The bench is invited particularly to hear them. He walked to Nell last, in front of all of them, empty-handed. The faded blue ribbon was in her pocket, where it had lived since the night in the rain. The ribbon is yours, he said, only to her now, and quietly. I will not touch it again. I love you. That's not a bid, Nell. The auction's over. It's just the true entry, and it stands whatever you do, and it asks for nothing back. I am done, as of this morning, with every road to you that doesn't run through your own free yes. Then you know where the riding house is. Her voice was rough. Her hand closed in her pocket around a strip of faded blue, her eyes bright and undeceived. Stand where the county can see you, Marcus, not in front of me, behind. If you ask me, I just did, said Nell Arden, and turned and walked back through her unsold horses, touching each grey wet neck as she passed, while the county watched a woman it had priced wrong for 10 years begin, visibly to be someone it had been wrong about. He came to the west stable door at dusk, the night before the exhibition. Nell was there before him, which she had promised herself she would not be. No rain this time, a clean cold sky going green at the edges, the brass latch cold under her palm out of pure habit. 10 years and a day, if anyone was counting, since a girl said a written sentence in the rain. They were both counting. I brought nothing, Marcus said, showing his hands, bare, both of them, nearly a fortnight's habit now. No papers, no plans, no news. I came to stand at a door with you. That's the whole errand. Then stand. They stood. An owl worked the far hedge, and slowly, with nothing to transact, they introduced themselves. I'm not him, Marcus said at last. The one you were going to marry. He was better company. But he'd have got himself killed on your behalf within the season and called it devotion. The one who came back knows what a door costs. The other one never had to learn. I'm not her either, Nell said. The girl who tied ribbons. I've buried a father, banked 10 winters, and run a yard in a county that priced me mercenary at 20. The stillness is bone now, Marcus. If we do this, that's the mare you're buying. She goes quiet when she's cornered, and she decides alone at exactly the moment she shouldn't. Then we're a matched pair of ruins. We're a matched pair of survivors. It's a different breed. Ruins want rebuilding. I don't. She looked at him in the last light. I want to be read fair and left standing. Can you love a thing you don't get to fix? I own a horse on those exact terms, he said gravely, and startled the true laugh out of her. The wind didn't hold. He reached for the armor that had held him upright 10 years. "Then I'll take myself off," he said. "Out of your yard, out of your daylight, till the county's done. Send for me or don't. I'd not have you choose me for want of room to choose otherwise." It was handsomely meant. Then she saw the shape under it, the same shape in a humbler coat. "There it is again," she said. "Command couldn't have me, so it's come back wearing leaving. That's still you deciding what I'll feel, Marcus, and calling it mercy. I don't want the room emptied. Remain long enough to be answered. That's the harder thing, and it's the one I'm asking of you." He took a breath. He did not turn into a sentence, and stayed where he was. "Forgiveness, restitution, desire, and choice," Nell said, keeping her hand off the latch, because her hand had opinions. "The county thinks they're one word. I've learned they're 4. Restitution you've paid as far as money and paper can pay it. The yard stands, though it is not whole, and that book closes. Forgiveness for the fortnight you have. I watched you cut the tags in the rain with your bare blue hands, and I'm not made of slate. Desire, and it cost her to keep the voice level. You know, you've known since the doorway in the rain. But choice, Marcus, choice I'm still holding, because it's the one thing of mine that was never once in the price. Dorian never got it, you never lost it, and I want to hand it over whole, in the daylight, after, when it's free of every debt in the county. You waited at a chapel wall once for a woman who never came. I'm asking you to wait one more day for one who will." For a long moment he said nothing at all. Then he said, "Say the last part again." "No," she said. But she said it smiling, and the smile undid the word. It would have been so little, a half step, a tilt. His eyes asked. Hers answered, plainly, yes, and not tonight. He took the answer without 1 inch of advance. What she felt then, watching him not move, was the thing the old doorway had never once paid her. Certainty, banked, at interest. "You may call me Nell again," she said. "You've been rationing it. I've noticed. Consider the ration lifted." "Nell," he said, spending it immediately, the whole word, both hands open at his sides. The voice came from the yard gate, pleasant as ever. How very touching the county has become. Sir Dorian March stood alone in the dusk, hat in hand, unhurried, a magistrate paying a call. "I'll keep it brief. Proceed with tomorrow's little theatrical, and at dawn I lay a fresh information against Tam Arden. Finch's sworn evidence is in the old inquest papers, Fairholt, and he can swear it again. A man should know what his evening's sentiment purchases." Nell felt Marcus go still beside her, and then felt him, deliberately, hand the moment across. He turned to her, not to Dorian, and asked, in exactly the voice he used at Bastian's door, "What do you want?" "Tomorrow," Nell said, to Dorian, watching him fail to understand what he was looking at. "Charge whom you like at dawn, Sir Dorian, but come to the riding-house first. Bring the mare. Let him say it where she can answer." The Fairholt riding-house was the brightest room in the county, 100 feet of raked sand under high glass. By 11, half the shire was in it. The bench, with Sir Thomas Vell at its centre, Lady Winifred in the patron's box, Dorian March at the gallery rail with his certainty on him, like Sunday clothes and Celandine stabled below. He opened his attack before the third class had cleared the sand, pleasant and carrying. He regretted to say that the morning after the horse show he would be laying an old matter before the bench, the death of his brother. This was better than horses. It was Tam who answered him, exactly as planned, and past planning now. He walked into the empty ring, hat off, and asked Sir Thomas Vell's leave to speak in advance of any charge, and got it. 10 years ago, I was accused of frightening Cedric March's mare at Coldwater Bridge, Tam said, plain and loud. Before it happened, I stood in a tack room passage at March Hall and heard Sir Dorian March, alone, saying one sentence over and over, like a man conning a part. I'll say it now, and there's a man in this hall who can tell you whether I have it fair. I will not trade the rest of my life for a younger son's promise. Sir Dorian has put the Arden house right, and I prefer certainty. Marcus stepped to the rail. He did not raise his voice. The high roof did it for him. Word for word, he said. Those are the words my betrothed said to me, the night before our wedding, 10 years ago this fortnight. I have never repeated them to a living soul. The hall's silence changed textures. Dorian's voice came down easy from the rail. Brother and sister, rehearsing a decade, a family may con any speech it likes, Vel. Grief invents, it proves nothing, and my bench does not sit for theatre. No, Nell said, it doesn't, and she walked out onto the sand alone. She had Celandine brought up. Dorian permitted it with a bow, the mare was his best evidence, and stood the old chestnut in the middle of the bright ring, loose on a long lead. The show's marshal, at her open instruction, gave every yard call in the county. Celandine flicked an ear and stood. Ordinary sounds, ordinary mare. You could feel the galleries begin to be bored, and that was the point. Nell let them get all the way there. Fenna, she said. From the lowest gallery, Fenna stood, unwrapped a stocking, put the cracked bone whistle to her mouth, and blew, and the sour rising interval crossed the hall. The mare came off the earth, up, full height, forelegs boxing, and round, a wrenching quarter turn on her hocks, drill clean, landing to face the sound. The hall came up off its benches in one gasp, and the marshal's voice cracked out across the noise, professional and appalled, calling it as he'd call a manager figure. Rear and quarter turn to a sound cue. Trained, sirs. That is no startle and no common vice. What they did not get was a runaway. They got Nell Arden, who dropped the lead into the sand, stepped outside the reach of the forelegs, lowered her voice into the register she kept for frightened things, and stood still, open hand, weight back, asking. The hall watched a rearing horse choose. Celandine came down, stood shaking, took one step, another, and put her grey-flecked muzzle into a palm that had never once pulled her, and blew out, and settled, while 100 and some people watched what the county called softness hold a trained explosion in one bare hand. That whistle was found below Coldwater Bridge the morning after Cedric March died, Fenna said, loud and flat. I found it, and before that day was out, March men came down our lane asking had anyone picked up aught from the banks. Urgent they were, and I have never in my life liked urgent. So I lied to them, and I've kept it and the lie 10 years. I'll swear to the place and the day. And I'll swear who taught her. Abel Finch came down the gallery stairs like a man wading out of deep water. The two men looked at each other across the bright air. Whatever ownership had said in that look all these years, it had stopped working. I taught her, Abel said, turning to Vel. 2 winters, on Sir Dorian's order, and at Coldwater Bridge, on the morning, his order was, at my raised hand, 2 notes, make her dance. He gave it all, the hedge, the route changed, the raised hand that came anyway with his brother on the stone, the oath demanded over the body, and a daughter kept close as surety, then turned out as a warning. I blew the notes. I'll answer for it, wherever answering's done. But I was the instrument. There stands the hand. Uproar then, and through it Dorian March came down the gallery stairs, not fleeing, that was never in him, and stood at the ring-rail with his face gone grey. And there the vanity the county had trusted him for finished him. He had never once let a story stand told wrong in his hearing. He did not manage it now. What he said almost quietly, so the hall had to still itself to hear. He was to fall on grass. Even now the voice kept its reasonable furniture. A meadow, a bruise and a lesson, no more. Cedric turned onto the bridge. Cedric always turned where it wasn't planned. For one breath, the magistrate's face broke open, and what was under it was not a monster, but a man who had stood guard on a grave until he could call it a boundary dispute. Then he closed again around the old cold centre, and what he said last, he said to Nell, without appeal. Everything after, I did so the falling shouldn't be for nothing. Locked doors, said Lady Beatrice March, from the gallery, clear as a struck glass, are not safety, Dorian. They never once were. Sir Thomas Vell rose, and was brief. The county justices would meet within the week to take the examinations and decide committal for the spring assizes. He would write that day through the Lord Lieutenant to the Lord Chancellor, seeking Sir Dorian's removal from the Commission of the Peace. Sir Dorian March and Abel Finch would both surrender to the constables now, and the examining justices will weigh coercion of that length at its true rate, Finch. The constables walked Dorian out. The hall parted for him without sport. Ruth stood with her father's big hand held in both of hers, and the big man wept without a sound. Then the morning did the thing Nell had not planned and could not have. Lady Winifred Ashendale came down from the patron's box, slowly, in front of the entire assembled county, and stopped in front of Nell on the churned sand. 10 years ago, she said, pitching it to reach the glass, in my own drawing-room, I named this woman mercenary. I coined a phrase, Miss Arden's price, and you all repeated it under my roof, and I let you. I stopped the invitations. Mine was the hand, no one else's. I was not deceived, mark you. I was eager. It suited my grief to have someone small to blame, and it turns out I paid 10 years of a good woman's name for it, and I am here to hand the name back, where the county can watch me do it, since the county watched everything else. Nell had stood steady for the mare, for Abel, for Dorian's grey face. This nearly took her off her feet. But one thing left belonged to her, and she made her voice carry to the rafters. Then hear the rest, and hear it once, because I'll not perform it twice. The hall went dead quiet. I did not choose money. I have never in my life chosen money. I chose my brother's neck out of a noose built by the man you just walked out of here, and I'd pay it again tomorrow. And any woman in these galleries who says she wouldn't has no brother. Her voice did not break. It burned level. But I'll own my share. I decided alone. I let a good man carry a lie 10 years because I judged him too rash to carry the truth, and I never asked him. I was never the woman this county made of me. The one who's left is the one who schools your bad horses, and she is done being anybody's cautionary tale. The sound the hall made then was not applause exactly. It was lower, a long assenting rumble with wet eyes in it, the sound of a verdict reversing itself in public. Only then did she turn and look for Marcus. He had kept his word through all of it, behind her, at the rail, silent, a wall at her back. Now he came out onto the sand and stopped a horse's length off. He stripped his gloves, both, and dropped them in the sand, and worked the spurs off his boots, and dropped those, and stood and waited, hands open, asking her nothing out loud in front of everyone. Nell crossed the distance herself and put her hand in his. Around them, the morning loosened into its human ending. Fenner put an arm around Ruth. Tam lifted Molly, who surveyed Bastian at the rail and pronounced him, with satisfaction, another duke. Beatrice left the gallery on her own brother's arm without a backward look. Marcus bent his head to Nell's ear at the very last and asked for nothing even then. It was she who spoke. "The west stable door," she said. "Tomorrow, at first light, come and ask me something." He was at the west stable door before the light was. The Duke had walked from Fairholt in the dark to be early to a door. Frost on the gate, the latch cold under her palm. He stood where the arrangement put him, off the threshold, bareheaded. His hands were shaking. He let her see that they were. "You were told to come and ask me something," she said. "So I was." He did not kneel. Neither of them could have borne a performance. He asked it at a doorway, waiting, where the whole thing had been learned. "Nell Arden, will you marry the man who came back? Not because he restored what he broke, not because you have forgiven him, because you choose him." Her heart went like a girl's, and this once she let it show, in the plain, warm voice that had been 10 years retired. "Yes to the man," she said, "not yet to the wedding. Court me through winter, Marcus. Sundays and stable evenings, gates and fords, the whole slow apprenticeship you were cheated of. Ask me again when the waiting has become a habit. I want a yes with no debt anywhere under it, and winter is what it costs." "Then I am courting you," said the Duke of Fairholt, like a man entering it in a ledger. Bastian, above the door, sighed like a bellows. They both laughed. So they had the winter, and the winter was the wealth. He came Sundays and most evenings, learned the feed rounds, and was sent up ladders. Once he arrived late and had sent word before the hour. Once Tam corrected his girth before the whole yard. Marcus unbuckled it and began again. The common stayed open. The lease was signed on terms that needed no duke's goodwill to survive. And before anything else was promised, the lease, the stock, and her earnings went to trustees for Eleanor Arden's sole and separate use, so that what she kept after any wedding, she kept in her own right, and not by a husband's leave. Tam stood publicly cleared. Dorian March waited in the county jail for the spring assizes in a county that had simply gone quiet on him. "There's the whole of his ruin," Fenner said once. A county with no more appetite for his version. He planned for every mortal thing but that one. Abel Finch waited at his own hearth under bail granted by King's Bench after the county examinations. Whatever came, Ruth reported, he slept the whole night through now. And by Candlemas, Lady Beatrice had taken a small house on her brother's land, in her own name, with her own key, and was heard to say that the key was the best furniture in it. At the winter's far edge, with the first thaw running loud in the beck, Marcus asked again at the west stable door. The waiting had become a habit, and the habit had become the answer. "Yes," said Nell Arden, "to the man, and to the wedding, and to the morning after it." After banns had been called on 3 Sundays, both at Fairholt and in Larkspur parish, they were married in the last week of winter, at Larkspur's small public chapel, on a bright hard morning, with frost on the gate and the bell ringing all the way through this time. The wedding was small, because Nell built it small. Family, the yard, Fenner in her good shawl, Ruth and Abel in the 3rd pew, Lady Winifred upright in the 2nd, having sent the first invitation herself, a small stiff card that had cost her more than the county would ever be told. Nell married him in a blue dress with her own name held out plainly in the vows. Eleanor Arden, of Larkspur Yard, and kept the yard, the work, the whole of herself, which was, as he understood it now, the entire point of everything. After, while the small crowd walked down to the wedding breakfast, the two of them went the other way, to the west stable door. The horses were saddled and waiting. He had asked Fenner to have it so, on the theory that a man this late should at least have the horses stand ready twice. Bastian stood at the open loose box. Marcus went to him bare-handed and unspurred, and opened the door full wide, and stepped back and waited. The big black horse looked at the doorway a long moment, at the clear width of it, and walked through on a loose rein like any honest horse coming out to work. 4 years of doorways, Marcus thought, and did not say. Some ledgers you close quietly. At the door itself, under the slates, Nell stopped him with a hand flat on his chest. No mud on the palm this time, the same law in it. Ask me the small one now. Nell, may I? You may, she said, you great slow soldier. And that was the last of the waiting. He kissed her, asked and answered, her hand coming up to his collar, his coming to her face the old way at last, cradling, and this once nothing in her flinched from it. Rain had made the first kiss, frost made this one. The mare in the near stall went on chewing. The latch was cold. When they came apart, she was laughing, quiet, into his coat. He had the sense of standing in his own life at last with the deed in his hand. She turned to the saddles then, and took from her pocket a ribbon. New, bought in town, blue as the day it was dyed. She cut it in two, and tied a length to the inside ring of each saddle, his and hers, so that nothing joined the horses, and nothing needed to. The old one? He asked. Fenner's tack box. Retired with honours. It did years of work no ribbon should be asked for. She swung up without a hand offered or needed, and gathered her reins, and looked down at him with the low sun full on her face, unguarded, 30 years old, and beginning. Well, your grace, there's a common open, and a morning up, and you owe me a dawn ride I mean to collect in full. They went out through the yard at her pace, which was a walk, past the loose boxes and the kind eyes of horses, through the gate that stood open on its own weight now, and up into South Common with the frost smoking off the grass. Not toward Fairholt, and not away from anything. 2 riders and a handspan of blue between the saddles, riding out at last into the 80 acres of ordinary morning that had been waiting for them the whole time.